If I'm the best ground tank player in the world, and I fundamentally cannot express my skill on that map is not well designed and it needs a rework. Simple as. So I thought I'd make this video on the Dorado rework specifically. There's been other reworks like Havana and Circle Royale, but Dorado stirred up the most controversy on Twitter, and I think I can add some pretty important and nuanced sort of perspective to what's good about this change, what's bad about this change, and why this change as a whole is, in my opinion, pretty good. So obviously here I made this tweet, cold take, Overwatch should be a game where how you play matters more than what you play. So this harks back all the way to the 6v6 and 5v5 debate about counter-swapping, where the general sort of argument or the line was counter-swapping is bad because it makes tanks about what they play, not how you play your tank. It's about what the matchup is, not how you play the matchup. And I'm essentially using that logic here. In terms of the general reception on Twitter, Mrs. Edis got this tweet with 16k likes, over 1 million views, so pretty good like to view ratio there, about I used to play for times like this. Obviously a good nod to this change, approving this change. Obviously there's some tweets that were made here that disapprove of it, and we'll get into it. To go through some other big names on Twitter, Confusion just said, can we just let certain comps be good on certain maps? We don't need to force ground tanks to be playable everywhere. Again, they don't provide an argument as to why we don't need to have ground tanks to be playable everywhere. They don't provide that argument, but yeah. I don't know if this is a genuine tweet because Renko says, nah, this map is terrible, it needed to be changed anyways, and the Confusion says, saying that doesn't get me interactions though, so I don't know whether this is a troll post or not. Someone with an actual take though, Gala, who is one of the flex sports for Team Virtus Pro, almost made it to Stockholm yesterday, and he said, someone is doing a good job from the inside. Only 2 Asia spots for Korea, and reworking most dive maps right before the LAN. Good job, good job. It's so funny, lol. Obviously this is a jab at the devs being very Western-minded because Stockholm only has 2 Asia spots, even though Asia is one of the most competitive regions with some of the best players, and now they're having a jab at the dive maps, and Korea is known for their dive, so this is obviously him saying that this is against Asia and Korea. So I've broken this down into 3 main arguments. The first one is probably the most common one that I've seen, is that this change removes the dive identity from the map. So Gala kind of alluded to this vaguely in his post, but this one I've just seen generally on Twitter from people saying that, and I'm going to go through why this argument is not a good argument. So there's 2 key parts to the remove identity argument. The first one that I have is that it doesn't remove the identity of it being a dive map, it just changes it a little bit. So first off, we're going to have to briefly talk about what even is identity. I study philosophy, but I don't want to get too boring here. In short, one of the most famous philosophers, John Locke, said that identity comes down to memories, and the idea here being that you can still play dive, you can still have those old memories of playing dive on the new Dorado, even if it isn't insanely dive focused. If the dive identity of Dorado was removed entirely, then dive would no longer be viable on Dorado, and this is highly unlikely. You know, Dorado has still got tons of high ground maps. Adding an elevator and a staircase on second point isn't really going to change all that much about dive being super favored on the map. All this really does is that it makes more comps viable. It's not trying to force comps to be optimal, it's not trying to force Brawl to be optimal, it's not even trying to force Brawl to be equally as viable as dive. It's just trying to make sure that there's a baseline level of map viability so that if you are really good at a ground tank like Reinhardt or Sigma or Ramatra, you have that ability to play and express that skill on the map. And again, well, when we talk about the noob-friendly change here, this actually increases skill expression in my opinion. You can see Commander X, who is a former Overwatch League coach, talk about that right here.
I still think, like when I look at Dorado, is this not still a dive map? If we load into Dorado at Stockholm, maybe like the ground stuff becomes X percentage more viable, right? I think that's fair to say. But my impression is it's still going to be better for dive.
The second counter argument here is that even if it did change or remove the identity, whatever you want to say, is that necessarily a bad thing? Just because something has identity doesn't mean that identity is inherently good. I could have an identity as a murderer, that doesn't mean it's good. And to express that point in this context here, is identity more important than competitive integrity? Likely not. And the main reason why I say that is because at the end of the day, you're going to have to play on this map. It needs to be enjoyable to play, not just for the pros, but for casuals and even ranked players in general. And I think this change is a good step forward to that. Even if you reject that point and you do say that identity is more important than competitive integrity, we've already established that Dorado isn't losing its identity as a whole, as a dive map, right? It's just being slightly changed or altered to allow a greater breadth of different comps on it. The second argument that I've commonly seen is that this is a noob-friendly change, and the main counter-argument to this one is that, is it a bad thing that it's a noob-friendly change, considering that, actually, it increases skill expression at the top level. So we've got a good Command X quote here that I'm going to go through right here.
Like, if you look at these Dorado changes, as a team like Toronto Defiant, are you looking at it and going, guess there's no way to play Winston and a Brig on Dorado anymore? Or are you actually looking at it and going, okay, there's a few new problems to deal with. There's a few new, like, a few new things teams can do. But fuck, it still feels like it's going to be good for Winston and a Brig, you know?
So the key bits I've highlighted there is, there's a few new problems to deal with. There's a few new things that teams can do. And the reason why I've highlighted that is because that shows, or that says, that teams are going to have to get better at playing dive on Dorado because there can be more variety in what's being played. It's not just dive mirrors that you need to be good at, you need to be playing dive into Brawl, playing dive into double flex, and I think double flex Sigma comps, by the way, are going to be pretty good on Dorado on second point especially. The silence are pretty long, and again, you can get to high ground pretty easily. They're going to need to be good at playing dive into those kind of comps. It's not just dive mirrors. How does that not increase skill expression? How is that noob friendly? How is that making the noobs win? The ultimate point here is that everybody wins. You make the maps more accessible at lower level play because you can access the high grounds more easily on ground based tanks while increasing that skill expression at the top level. What's not to love about the change? You know, like, I don't get it. To build on from that, I did see a tweet from Coach Roseus responding to my initial tweets saying that making it brain dead to capitalize on high grounds goes against what you just said, and I disagree with this entirely. Accessing the high ground is not capitalizing on it. That's super important to make that distinction there. How is me playing Reinhardt and walking to the stairway and walking to the high ground, how is that capitalizing on it? I'm standing on it, I'm accessing the high ground, but I'm just not capitalizing it again. Like, you can't just stand on the high ground and win the map. That's not how Overwatch works. You know that yourself. You're a tier 2, tier 3 coach. And I say it here, right? High grounds are easier to access, doesn't mean that once you reach high grounds, you've just won the game, right? And we can see that here, that if you're playing Reinhardt and you're walking up to high ground, there's still other threats that you need to be dealing with. It's not like you just insta-won the game. So the third argument that I've seen occasionally on Twitter is that this Dorado change would be fine if there weren't so many Brawl-centric maps. And the crazy thing is that I agree with this, right? So we've seen Gala make this tweet, you know, talking about how why rework the few dive maps that cater towards Asian players or Korean players, and we see this tweet here underneath my tweet initially saying the annoying thing is that we have maps where you have to play Brawl, but they're killing one of the few maps that you have to play dive. And I agree with this, you know, I'm going to stand on business and I'm going to say that on Brawl-centric maps like Lijiang Control Center or other Brawl-centric maps, they should also be reworked to allow a greater variety of different comps, right? It shouldn't just be Brawl, it shouldn't just be a Risa Brawl dive, you know? It shouldn't just be Malga comps being played there. And in fairness, I don't think Lijiang Control Center is that bad of a map. Like, you can still play Pharmacy on that map, Brawl is still very playable on that map. We saw Crazy Raccoons play that, I think, a few months ago. Like, it's not even that Brawl-centric, but hopefully I'm getting the point across here. To basically summarize things, the bottom line is that I shouldn't have to instantly lose a game because of the map that was chosen, which limits my own skill expression as a player. If I'm the best ground tank player in the world, and I fundamentally cannot express my skill on that map is not well designed and it needs a rework. Simple as. And just to clarify in the Dorado case here, it's not about making ground tanks or comps equally as viable as other options. It's about giving those comps a baseline level of viability such that if you're skilled enough or you're good enough, you're gonna beat teams playing the optimal comp for the map, or the more favourable comp for the map. And to give an example of this, I think Blizzard World is a great case study. On the whole, I'd say it's a poke dive favoured map, but you still see Brawl teams like Spitfire back in the day playing Brawl on that map and getting results with it. And that's because Spitfire are skilled enough at that comp. They can get away with running a suboptimal comp on that map. And that's all this Dorado change is, right? It's allowing a greater variety of comps without making them equally as viable or outright removing the dive identity from Dorado. As always, let me know your thoughts down below. I think I hopefully explained that pretty well, but yeah, this is going to be a bit of a slop video, so to say. Low production quality, low costs, but yeah, let me know your thoughts down below, and until next time.